Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. If you like these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel right here at Watchbox Reviews. I'd really appreciate it, and I'd be able to send videos of watches like this to your inbox as soon as tomorrow morning. If you like this watch, you can purchase it with 2,000 others 24 hours a day and globally. Buy, trade, and sell watches on thewatchbox.com. And today we are discussing a debutante at Basel 2015, the successor to the 2013 Omega Speedmaster 57. This was the vintage dial that reprised the famed broad arrow of the original 1957 Omega Speedmaster, the timepiece with a gorgeous vintage-inspired subdued tone sandwich-style dial. It's got a little bit of Panerai in it. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's talk about what makes the modern Speedmaster 57 what it is. It's not as big as it looks. On my 16-centimeter circumference wrist, this is actually a 41.5mm case, so in terms of bare dimensions, it's actually a little smaller across the case than a Moonwatch. In terms of thickness, there's no getting around it. It's chunky, 16.4 millimeters thick. It has a generously box-section sapphire and a domed sapphire on the case back to match, as well as a little bit of a cantilever to the flared tachymeter scale bezel. So it's not going to fit underneath perhaps shirt sleeves, but it should have no trouble with a jacket of any kind. Lug-to-lug, two ways to measure this watch. If you're going to wear it on a strap, you're going to find that the span is 50 millimeters lug-to-lug. That's the case. The solid end links, bracelet to bracelet, across the wrist, you're going to find that's a more substantial 53.9 millimeters, but it wears easily on my wrist, and I would say this is probably a good match for wrists as small as 14 to 14.5 centimeters circumference. I'd say about 14.5 if your wrist is round, a little bit smaller if you have the oval profile that I have. It is comfortable. You'll note that the bracelet, a bit more vintage-inspired than what you'll find on other Speedmaster models, has a straight profile to it, so the taper almost non-existent. It continues the minimally beveled profile of the lugs, which do have a little bit more bevel than a true 1957 Speedmaster, but far straighter with sheer sides that you're not going to find on a Moonwatch. The timepiece, of course, features a combination of polish and satin. It is a handsome bracelet with a nice contrast between the two different metal finishes, and if you turn it over, you can see big gaps between the links by design to aerate the wrist on a hot day, as well as to avoid pinching skin or pulling hairs. You'll note that sizable links are removed by screws, not pin sleeves, and there is a nice double deployant clasp with trigger release, so you have absolute security. Both triggers must be depressed to pop this bracelet open. Moving back to the case, as I mentioned, it is a little bit more of the sheer flank squared off profile that you would find on a true vintage Speedmaster like a 2915, and the timepiece is handsome and elegant and minimalist for it. You do have the tachymeter scale, a metal scale like the original CK2915, and you'll also note that on its flanks, though it's satin on its tops, it does have a polished surround. You'll also note that the tack features sunken calibrations and text in a black lacquer for high contrast on its satin surface, and then the dial, and we do need to get a bit closer here to get the most out of the details, but the dial is sensational. It has recesses for the individual indices, and the construction is very much like what you'll find on a contemporary Panerai sandwich dial, in which the luminescence is recessed into wells to create the appearance of a stencil over a solid disc of lume. So you have that. You also have the ecru or off-white tones. Now this is Luminova. It's not vintage tritium or radium, but it's designed to, in many ways, emulate the romance and the charm of those fades without actually losing the luminescence. There will be a lume shot at the end of the video, and it will be worth the wait. You can see that the same is true of the text and the printing on the dial. The dial is somewhere between black and tobacco brown, so it has a little bit of a vintage hue, a tropical style vintage hue in its own right. Now you will note that the broad arrow hour hand returned. Present on the 1957 original, it was curiously absent from the 2013 Speedmaster 57. It returned in form and in force on this vintage dial for 2015. You'll also note a twin-register vintage-inspired layout, but a tri-register chronograph with chronograph seconds at center, and then you can see there's a superimposed mono counter with two alpha-style hands for hours and minutes on the same register at 3 o'clock, and then constant running seconds at 9 o'clock. There's a date window with a monotone disc, and you'll note the printing also in that faded fashion of the rest of the dial. Stop the chronograph for a second. We can take a quick look at the time zone function that is characteristic of the caliber 9300. Now, you will note, let's move the chronograph seconds hand out of the way, that the time zone function lets you jump the date in either direction as you traverse the international date line. And this is important because you do have the ability to set the watch as you travel without actually affecting the timing of the timepiece. You can see that the timepiece features the ability to jump time zones without stopping the rest of the indications of the dial. You can even have the chronograph running. Now, if you do pull the crown out entirely, you'll find that you can hack the seconds, stop everything, and synchronize to a known accurate reference time. That said, it's not necessary. For the most part, those of you who are world wanderers are going to be jumping in hour increments, not worrying about seconds or fractions of a second. Nevertheless, it's there should you want it. It's also important to note the movement is the 9300, and there is an extraordinarily domed profile about the Sapphire over the caseback. This is mostly because the 8500 with the tri-level coaxial is a thick movement. When you make a chronograph out of it, it's even thicker. That said, it's worth the thickness. This is an incredible caliber. You'll note a free-sprung balance with a full balance bridge for shock resistance, the SI-14 silicon hairspring for anti-magnetism. You'll also note that there is a full column wheel with levers and horns, old school, crisp, audible chronograph actuation. You'll also note that it is a vertical clutch, since as I start the chronograph, there is no jump or stagger to the seconds hand, always resets precisely to the index at 12 because of the vertical clutch. There's no play in the system, and because the vertical clutch doesn't create additional wear and tear on the movement, you have the ability to just run the chronograph continuously, so you can have hours, minutes, and seconds at center. Ignore the chronograph register. Now you've just got center seconds. Some prefer that. This watch delivers 100-meter water resistance, so this can be an aquatic watch, especially on the bracelet, and you'll note vintage-inspired pump pushers. The timepiece is adjusted in 5 positions, and it is a COSC certified Swiss chronometer. It's also that tri-level coaxial I promised you, so this was built from the base plate up to be a coaxial, unlike the 3330, 3313, and 2500 calibers, which were adapted ETAs. This one was born a coaxial. As a result, it is very accurate as well as very robust. You'll also note on the opposite side, twin mainspring barrels in series for a very long power reserve of 60 hours, but more than that, a superb and even torque release throughout the full duration of the power reserve, so the watch can keep excellent time regardless of where it is in its state of wind. The automatic winding rotor is bidirectional for smoothness, and the entirety pivots on 54 individual synthetic rubies. You'll also note arabesque Côte de Genève spirals across the bridges and the winding mass, as well as black oxidized screws rather than polished or blued. Omega doing things its own way to make an attractive watch that's also technically appealing. You can see and you can own this Omega Speedmaster 57, the 2015 model, with vintage style dial and broad arrow hour hand on our website, thewatchbox.com. And we're back with the Omega Speedmaster 57 vintage dial. As you can see, by night, thoroughly contemporary, nothing vintage about this. The watch continues to beat away at the quirky coaxial rate of 25,200 vibrations per hour. If you're new to the coaxial technology, it was developed by the late independent watchmaker George Daniels, an acknowledged maestro of watchmaking in the modern era, for reduced frictional losses, long-term timing stability that surpasses conventional Swiss levers, as well as reduced maintenance requirements. You can see the case back, you can see the entirety on our website, thewatchbox.com.